Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to our commented chess games played by computer series. So in this series we're following some great games that have been played by top engines, and today I've decided to show a really beautiful game that has been played by two top engines, Arasan versus Stockfish 15 from the CCR Chess.com official website, and it's a beautiful game in an exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez, and the cool part is again that we'll see the Stockfish 15 engine battling it out again with the black pieces, and I really love to see more of these games played by Stockfish with the black pieces, especially in this, I like to call them annoying openings. And the Ruy Lopez exchange variation is such an annoying opening. When my opponent plays this bishop against the knight on c6 trade, I really don't know sometimes where should I attack. Should I attack the queen side? Should I attack the king side? Should I make pawn breakthroughs in the center of the board? Should I trade off more pieces? Should I go into an endgame? Should I not go into an endgame? So these are the questions that always bothered me. So that's why I think if you are asking yourself the same question, I think this will be a perfect game for you, because the Stockfish will show us here really the most important strategic ideas about the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez, and then eventually Stockfish will also show great tactical skills, but then also beautiful endgame elements that I think you can use in your own game. So it was really instructive game, I think, really worth to study if you're of course a Ruy Lopez player. So let's see now the game, Arasan versus Stockfish 15 in the exchange variation of the Spanish game of the Ruy Lopez. So here e4 was played by Arasan. We have e5, knight to f3, we have knight to c6, bishop to b5. The Spanish game, the Ruy Lopez, is on the board. So a6, we have the Morphy defense, bishop takes c6. Now it becomes of course the exchange variation. So here we have always this rare case when you take away from the center. Usually you should take here towards the center with the b pawn, but in these types of structure the recommended move is here the move d takes c6. So far knight takes e5 is not a threat, because queen to d4 is going to happen. Now we have an attack against the knight and against the pawn, so knight white has to retreat and we can take out the pawn on e4, so at least an equal position for sure here for black. So this is not working, so that's why kingside castling was played by Arasan instead of this move knight to e5. We have queen to f6, and this is also a rare case where I would recommend you to go out with the queen in an early stage of the game. Usually you should not play with the queen in an early stage of the game, because the queen can become as an object of your opponent's attack. But here actually it's perfectly fine, because we are continuing the pressure against the knight on f3. Now we will play bishop to g4, and then the main moves I think should be something like maybe bishop to c5, knight to e7, knight to g6, maybe even knight to f4 if possible, queenside castling and similar stuff, because we have to also notice the d file is open. So this could be a decent setup that you can build, of course, if your opponent allows every move that we have talked about now. So okay, now basically in this position, white has two choices sort of. White can play solid lines with knight to c3 or d3, developing the dark blue bishop, or can play the more direct way, more open way with the move d4. If your opponent plays now the move d3, my recommendation still would be to play something like bishop to g4, still continue the pressure here against the knight on f3. And the cool part is, after a potential h3 move, there is a beautiful line that I would recommend you to play here. It's the move h5. This wasn't played in the game, but it's a tricky dirty line here in the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. Now for instance, if black takes h takes g4, then the knight has to move, and now you can play queen to h4, build a beautiful battery on the h file, and white is getting destroyed for sure. Although we have to say white doesn't have to necessarily play the game like this. There are better lines for white, but I wanted to show just this tiny little trap, and in the continuation on my YouTube chess channel we will cover also the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez as a tutorial sort of. So then we will dive into more tactical ideas, more positional ideas about the exchange variation then for both sides. But as I said, I wanted to just show this one that you can maybe use in some blitz or bullet games. So here in continuation, after move queen to f6, the Arasan engine decided to play now the direct way with the move d4. So we have now e takes d4, bishop to g5, the queen gets attacked, queen to d6, and now after move knight to d4, here Stockfish noticed that here Arasan has already a good activity with both of these knights with the queen. Now f4 could be an opportunity, so that's why Stockfish tried to simplify the game, played now simply the move bishop to e7. So we have bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, and now after move knight to c3, here we have bishop to d7 with which becomes now a flexible move for black. Black has now the opportunity to castle kingside or to castle queenside. So here in these types of positions, I would recommend you to castle queenside, because obviously white will use this pawn majority attack here in this position in order to attack you, because we have here 4 versus 3 situation on the king side. So this majority white will use for sure, even if you don't castle queen side. If you castle king side here, then I think you will get crushed, because f4, maybe then e5, f5 if possible would happen, maybe f6. So white will let just this pawn roll against your queen, against your minor pieces, and then you have a certain lack of defender situation here. You don't have minor pieces, so it will be then very tough for you to defend the position if you castle, of course, king side. So that's why after move bishop to d7, knight to b3, here Stockfish castled simply on the queen side, and we have to notice now Stockfish gets out of the potential attack with f4, f5 and similar stuff. So okay, now the problem I think here for black is we have a certain 4 versus 3 pawn majority also here, but it's very tough to go and let this pawn roll, because you cannot create pass pawn here. It's really hard to make something out of your position. Your opponent didn't castle here queenside, so even if you create some kind of attack on the queen side, it's still tough to battle. So the only good thing I think here for black that black is here is this d file attack that we can use, and now also what we could use, maybe this long diagonal for the light square bishop, including maybe the light square bishop on c4 and similar stuff. So here in the continuation, f4 was played immediately by Arasan. Arasan again played this pawn majority attack, although black didn't castle on the queen side. If you play queen to d6 here, trade off the queens, then c takes d6, so you actually just improved the position of your opponent's pawn structure. Now maybe rook from a to d1 can be played, but now king to c7, and then we play bishop to e6. This d6 is protected, then we can search maybe for opportunities for the knight. Knight to g6, knight to e5, knight to c4 would be a beautiful route also here for black. In my opinion, this would be even a slightly better position here for black. So as I said, that's why after f4 here Stockfish played the knight to g6, attacking now the pawn on f4. Here we have queen to d3 by Arasan. Knight to f4 is not working here immediately, because queen takes d6 will happen, and then you have lost your defender of the knight. The knight will be taken and you lost a piece, so this is not working. So after move queen to d3, Stockfish simplified now the game with queen takes d3. We have c takes d3, and now a beautiful move f5 here played by Stockfish. So now you can make several choices. Again, in my opinion, if you play here the move e5, okay, you created this pass pawn, but actually this is not a mobile pawn structure anymore. We just play here bishop to e6, and we have blocked out this potential pass here of this pawn on the e file, and now here the d3 pawn is weak, so now we can also maybe trade off the bishop for a knight. We can maybe play some ideas of knight to e7, knight to d5. The most important thing here for black in this structure is to not allow these pawns in the center of the board to roll. So we are playing now from black's perspective first the defensive idea of the blockade of these pawns in the center. So it's now very important what Stockfish is doing. Look at this now. After move f5, knight to d4 was played, knight to e7. Now we have rook to d1, protecting now the d3 pawn and hoping for maybe d4 and maybe d5 breakthroughs in the center in the later stage of the game. So we have now c5, Stockfish kicks away the knight, and we have now knight to f3. So look at this. If you try here, knight takes f5, knight takes f5, e takes f5, bishop to f5. Okay, you gain the again your pawn majority. You have still this 3 versus 2 situation, but here the d3 pawn is simply too much weak. The too much weaknesses here. Here knight to e4 could happen. We can then block out the pawn with b6, rook to d6, rook to d8 is going to happen. Then we still continue the pressure. So I would not love to play anymore this game from white's perspective. So that's why knight to f3. You cannot trade off here anything around the square f5. So we have a rook to f8. We have now this idea e5, and now again bishop to e6. So Stockfish continues with this plan, blocked out now the potential progress of this pawn, and is continuing now also the blockade against the pawn on d3. So far the d3 pawn can be protected, but we have to say it's the main structural weakness in white's position. So we have now d4. Here the Arasan engine tried to improve this weakness, but now Stockfish plays a beautiful move c4, and you see now in this position, we didn't know actually that we should attack the queenside because it was really hard. But now after move d4 and c4, obviously look at this, b4, b5, b4, a5, a4 is going to happen. Now Stockfish 15 has a clear pawn majority attack here on the queenside, but of course we have to say black needs to be careful about this breakthrough idea with the move d5. But so far Stockfish controls everything with the rook, with the knight, with the bishop here. It's not allowing this pawn to get to d5. So we have now king to f2, we have b5. So you see Stockfish is getting better and better. So we have a knight to g5, bishop to g8. If you try of course here the move e6 is not too good, we simply kick away the knight, so you cannot again play this move with this pawn forward. So here in the continuation, after move bishop to g8, we have knight to f3, we have rook to d7, continuing the pressure now on the d file. We have h3 and now c6. Again, the beautiful blockade, still never allow white to push the pawn on d5. So we have now a3, we have h6, we have rook to e1, and now bishop to d5. Stockfish is offering now the bishop, but if that happens, then we just maybe improve our pawn structure. But I think we can even go with this one. Knight to d5 is perfectly fine. Then we can play a5, b4 against c3 with the support of the knight. Maybe this pawn majority attack is even much stronger. So that's why after move bishop to d5 here, Arasan didn't take it out, played knight to g1, and from this point on really Stockfish is playing like a boa constrictor here. It's not allowing here white to breathe. Every move is a brilliant positional move now by Stockfish. Look at this, bishop to e6, still with the control of the d5 square. Now we have to wait, we have to be patient here. We cannot just rush into the attack, but with every move Stockfish is improving the position for a little bit and then hopes for this c5, maybe b4 breakthrough here. So in the continuation we have knight to e2, rook to d8, again simple improvement of the piece. Now we have a battery and perfect control of the d5 square. So rook to g1, we have king to c7, rook to d2, and now c5. We're using now this battery on the d file, and now the pawn is lost here. So we have rook to d1, king to c6. Still of course this is not working because you lose the rook on the d file. So that's why king to e1 has to be played now. At least white is trying to connect the king to the rook battery of whites, but still it's not getting better because Stockfish just improved the position here. We have now h4, and now we have h5. We have here blocked out any progress by white, any potential progress of white. Now for instance g4 and similar ideas are not working. So we have now d takes c5, we have king to c5, rook takes d7, rook takes d7, and here rook to c1. Here Arasan didn't want to trade off because it creates this position where still black can play a5, b4. It becomes now a beautiful pawn majority anyway. So that's why rook to c1, at least keeping the rook for a while in the game, maybe hoping for some tactics on the c file, because we have to notice also the king is already there and now the rook is maybe targeting against black's king. So here in the continuation we have king to b6, Stockfish gets out of the range. We have a rook to d1, a rook takes d1, a knight takes d1, and now king to c5 anyway, again with the same idea, a4, a5, b4. So king to d2, we have knight to c6, including now the knight into the game. We have now g3, and now the normal idea a5. So knight to f2, we have knight to d4, we have knight to h3, and now knight to e2, king takes e2, and now finally this beautiful move b4. So we have now knight to g5 attacking the bishop, bishop to d7, and now e6. So here Arasan created a dangerous passer. The passer is supported by the knight. Now Stockfish has to retreat here, but at least Stockfish makes it with the counter attack. Now the serious threat is of course the move c3. So that's why we have a takes b4, we have king to b4, and this was the beautiful idea because now the king is getting closer to this pawn. It forces now Arasan to play passively with the king. King has to go here to d2, we have king to b3, and now the king is on the war square. It's on the back rank, on the first rank, and this is now 2 passive position of the king. Now Stockfish still has this 2 versus 1 situation, although these 2 pawns are not connected, but we will create a passer for sure. And against the knight, when you're playing against the knight, you want to create an outside or distant pass pawn, because the knight has really some problems to beat this distant pass pawn. It's much more important than create the c pawn. So when you have to make a decision and you're playing against the knight, you should always create the pass pawn on the a file or on the h file, but at least it's outside of the board, then your opponent cannot attack it easily with the knight. So huge and important idea in endgame stages. So here Stockfish played c3. So now with the normal idea, as we said, after b takes c3, king to c3, and now we have created the position that we wanted to get. So knight to f7, we have king to d4. You see how in this position black's king is much more active, and the cool part is that we have now pawns on both sides, and it's a perfect position for the bishop. The bishop loves when we have pawns on both sides. If the pawn structure would be symmetrical or something, if we would have only this 3 versus this 3 pawns, then it would be probably a draw. There's not a good way, of course, for white to win the game. But in this position where the position gets stretched, when the king has to maybe secure the a pawn, and the knight maybe has to secure this pawns on the king side, it's really hard for white to defend this position. So we have king to b2. If you try something like knight to d6, maybe to attack the bishop, then we just play bishop to c6. And look at this, even if you try to push the pawn, the problem is now the knight gets attacked. You have to play here the promotion, but actually even in this scenario it's winning for black, because black will simply take out all of these pawns. Look at it, we take out also this pawn, and now after king to g4 we have now reached this stretch position. As I said, we have now an outside pass pawn here on the h file, and we have also an outside pass pawn on the a file. The king is bothered always by this pawn. The knight can be maybe traded off for this pawn on the h file, but then white will simply black will simply take out the pawn on f4 and will create another pass pawn. So in this scenario it's again game over. So that's why after move king to d4, knight to d6 wasn't played by Arasan. Arasan continued with king to b2, but now again the king gets closer. King to d5, we have knight to g5, bishop to a6, we have king to c3, bishop to c8, attacking now the pawn. We have e2, and now bishop to d7, controlling now the e8 square, but also supporting now the passer. Now we can move up with the pawn to a4. So we have knight to f3, we have king to d6, knight to e5. Now Stockfish finally took. We have knight takes g6, but it doesn't matter. Stockfish created now a beautiful centralizing move with the king again, and now again the king is active. We're trying now to let this king roll here to the square g3, maybe again take out this pawn. If this pawn is taken, then again we can attack the f4 pawn and also the h4 pawn. So we have king to c4, bishop to e8, knight to e5, and now a4, king to d4, and now bishop to b5 controls everything. We're waiting now just the knight move, and then we're trying to push the pawn again, force a move of the king towards the queen side, and then including again the king into the attack. So knight to f7, king to e7, knight to e5, king to e6, and now we have a knight to f3, and now a3, and now we have reached this position, king to c3, but now the king is coming actively into the game. Really good move. Knight to e5, again we have a2, we have king to b2, but now bishop to c4 is defending everything. Knight to d7, and in this position Arasan resigns. So you see this bishop is protecting. It gives us the opportunity to play freely with our king. Now we have to play something like after something like this, we just play something like this, and still we keep the bishop on this diagonal. The pawn is protected. Now we play freely, and all of the pawns will be eventually taken, and as I said, it's simply game over. So really beautiful endgame technique here by Stockfish. Stockfish created this beautiful blockade idea in the center of the board. Never allowed the e pawn and the d pawn to be very active in the center of the board, and then eventually created this beautiful queenside attack with the pawn majority. Incredible game. So as I said, it is a tough battle. Maybe this wasn't the most attractive gameplay by Stockfish. This was maybe a too tactical, too beautiful game, but it's, I think, an important one in order to understand better the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of the Spanish game for sure. If you want to see more about this opening, you can also check out our Spanish Spanish opening games. We will do in the future tutorials about the Ruy Lopez for sure. So far, you can use these games that we have analyzed so far in order to have a good preparation. But as I said, in the near future, we'll explain more the exchange variation, the Morphy defense, some other ideas, the martial attack, anti-martial ideas, and similar stuff. So the Ruy Lopez is really tough to study. So be prepared. This will be, I think, a beautiful series for sure. So okay, see you soon with some more videos. And as I always like to say, chess is the best, of course.